Check, 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 check. 1, 2.
Check, check. Check, check.
Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, hello, and welcome. Thank you to all of you joining us here in the Clark Room, and welcome to all of you joining us online. Thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening. You're in for a very special evening. My name is Natalie Cash. I'm the executive video producer at the Wildlife Conservation Society. I'm also a fellow here. Oh, thank you. I have loaded the audience with friendlies. I'm also a fellow here at the Explorers Club and serve on the club's board of directors. With fellow director Paul Tangy and members Katie Losi and Callie Broaddus, I'm also proud to serve on the Public Lectures Committee. Public lectures are a time-honored tradition here at the club going back 100 years, all the way back to the 1920s, and have their origins in the small, informal, small-scale discussions that legendary explorers and club members would have at the turn of the century. Since then, Monday night presentations have become a staple here at the club and a platform from which all manner of speakers, from Neil Armstrong to Jane Goodall, have shared their discoveries with the peers and the general public. Now, by a show of hands, how many of you are here for your very first time? Oh, okay, welcome. And I guess that means the rest of you have been here before? You've been here before? Okay, whether it's your first time or your 500th time, welcome to the club. Over the past century, the Wildlife Conservation Society and the Explorers Club have shared a long and storied history and many similarities. WCS was founded as the New York Zoological Society in 1895, and the Explorers Club a mere 9 years later in 1904. Both operate in 50 countries around the globe, with 3,700 Explorers Club members engaged in science, exploration, and resource conservation for the benefit of humanity, while WCS has 5,000 field staff working globally to save wildlife and wild places, more staff in the field than any other conservation organization in the world. We are still based at our global flagship Bronx Zoo, which is where I first learned of tonight's speaker. Special thanks to Sue Chin, our Senior Vice President of Planning and Strategy and Advancement, for making the introduction and for making this evening possible. Now, before George Archibald founded the International Crane Foundation with Ron Sauey in 1973, he found himself a 23-year-old bell-bottomed, anti-war t-shirt wearing Cornell graduate student standing in the Bronx Zoo office of our longtime director, Dr. William Conway. Now, Conway was a visionary in both the zoological and the conservation fields, and had a deserved reputation as a formal and stern man who suffered little foolishness. But by the time George had finished speaking about his plan to study the species that he cared about so much at an old mink farm that he was refurbishing on Cornell's campus not far from the Lab of Ornithology, he not only had that rather stern zoo director giving him an insider's tour of the zoo, Conway also donated 22 Bronx Zoo cranes for the project, along with the funds to house and feed them. True story. So George went on to complete his PhD at Cornell in 1977, and since then has received 4 honorary doctorates and many awards. And I'm going to read this is a very impressive list, including the Gold Medal from the World Wildlife Fund, a Fellows Award from the MacArthur Foundation, the Wildlife Conservation Medal from the Zoological Society of San Diego, the Lilly Medal presented by the Indianapolis Zoo, and the Douglas H. Pimlott Award from Nature Canada. Didn't stop there. He was also awarded the Order of Canada on behalf of Queen Elizabeth II and received the inaugural Dan W. Lufkin Prize for Environmental Leadership from the National Audubon Society. His visionary leadership in international conservation efforts over the past 40 years have given flight to crane conservation worldwide. And with that, it is my distinct pleasure to bring up to the podium tonight's speaker, Dr. George Archibald.
Well, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you all for coming on this very hot day. Someone told me today that New Yorkers don't like to come out when the weather's bad. So I was all prepared. But the house is full, and what a beautiful building this is. Oh, man. I just feel so humbled to be in the presence of all these great explorers. And I'm going to just go right into my talk. My talk tonight is directed to those who don't know much about cranes. I know there are some funders here, there's some very sophisticated biologists and conservationists, but I'm going to talk to the people that don't know much about cranes. And someone asked me out there, why did you pick cranes? Well, I picked them because they're big and beautiful. I'm a little dyslexic and I'm colorblind, and warblers really throw me. So you can't miss these birds. They stand as tall as a man. They're monogamous. They love each other. They dance together. And they have very loud calls. So you can see them, you can hear them, there they are. And, you know, what are they? That's what everyone will ask. Well, they're a crane. And so someone who doesn't know a crane from a cow will know that they're special. And they are so magnificent. There's nothing more beautiful than those red-crowned cranes in Japan and China and Korea in the sky with their immaculate plumage. And here's the world's tallest flying bird. They stand 6 feet high, and they live from India to Australia. They're called the Saris crane. And they're not a huge family of birds. There are only 15 types of cranes. The primitive cranes are at the bottom. They're the crown cranes. They've been around 30 to 40 million years. And those species are extinct. But the sandhill crane, which is right dead in the middle and is now breeding in New York State, that is considered to be the oldest species of bird in the fossil record that's still with us. And they go back about 5 million years. Well, isn't it interesting that a family of bird that's been around so long should suddenly become one of the most endangered groups of birds in the world? And it's because of us. And that's my story tonight, about how we're going to help save a group of birds that are all over Asia and Africa, Australia, none in South America, and we don't know why, and just 2 in North America. The sandhill crane that's now breeding in New York State is the most abundant. There are more sandhill cranes than all the other cranes in the world put together. We have more than 1 million sandhill cranes divided into 6 different subspecies. And the rarest crane in the world is the whooping crane, the big white one from North America, which in the surviving migratory population was reduced to just 15 individuals in 1941. So, national bird of Uganda, the beautiful crowned crane. Crowned cranes are the only ones that like to go up into trees. They have long toes. And they were found all over North America and Europe and Asia. But when the world cooled down, we had the evolution of the cold climate cranes with their compact plumage, and they lost all this gaudy stuff that evolves in warm climates. And this is the red-crowned crane that have this area of bare skin on their head, and they have a muscle, they can pull it back and make it very, very large, or they have another muscle that can pull it ahead and hide it completely. And you can tell a crane's emotional state by how much red they're showing. And that's why I became so fascinated by the cranes, because they have such a complicated vocal language. They have many different types of calls, and it's not how you call, but not what you call, but how you say it. And their postures, they're so subtle, and often they don't have to call, they just do something with their body, and the other birds understand exactly what's going on. The evolutionary peak in displays is with the red-crowned crane. They're from Japan and China, and they're the only one that does a really good bow. And I often wondered, is that where it came from? And this winter, I was in Japan with my friends, and I said, look, we don't have a very good video of a crane dance at the Crane Foundation. We want one. Could you try to get me a really good video? And they said, yeah, we'll try. And they feed the cranes near their home. And they have a little pond there. They grow trout. And these cranes have become quite tame. They're up in the middle of nowhere in Hokkaido. And Mr. and Mrs. Nakamoto said, George, we'll try to get the dance. So I said, well, I have to leave now. I have to go to Korea tomorrow. But I'll go out and say goodbye to the cranes. So I went out and I'm standing there with my little video camera, you know, your cell phone. And this is what happened. They overheard the conversation. The chick is standing between mom and dad, looking sort of, what's going on here? Oh, and there's the arch. Another little arch. Now, one time I had to live with a crane that was imprinted on humans, and I'll tell you, I got in good shape. Now the chick is, oh, wow, maybe I can try that too. Now here is an old pair of birds. They've been producing chicks for years. And who says that relationships don't require continued work? They're obviously very fond of each other, but their pair bond is being reinforced. And people have observed this incredible drama for thousands and thousands of years, and we see cranes in petroglyphs all over the world, from Australia and so on. Well, thank you. There they are. And to produce that chick, this is what is required: vast expanses of shallow water. They can swim, but they don't like to. They like shallow water where they get fish to feed their fast-growing young. And that's the challenge all over the world. Now, these birds live in Wisconsin at the International Crane Foundation. We have a center, and I want to introduce Carrie Stauffer. She's here. She works with me at the Crane Foundation. And we have built these beautiful exhibits. It's something like the Bronx Zoo in small scale. And Bill Conway, of course, had a big impact on me, wanting to make it look like nature. So here we've created a little slice of Tibet. And this is how cranes call together. This is a perfectly synchronized duet of a mated pair of black-necked cranes. And they can migrate up to 28,000 feet above sea level over the Himalayas between their breeding grounds in Tibet, which you see in the background. And you see the glacier coming down between the mountains, and now because of climate change, the glaciers are melting, and they're producing a lot of wetlands, and the black-necked crane population is increasing. But when the glaciers are gone, the reverse is going to happen. So we have a big project. We're monitoring their populations and how there's a reflection of what's happening in so many parts of the world. Well, this is our rare crane. The rarest of all is still our whooping crane. Carrie, could you get me a glass of water? Sometimes I run out of steam up here. And they come down to Texas in the winter. This is the largest crane in Africa. It's a wattled crane, and this shows you where cranes nest. They pull up the vegetation into a little pile way out in the middle of their territory, and they lay 1 or 2 eggs. Wattled cranes usually only lay 1 egg. Most cranes lay 2. This is the most critically endangered of all the cranes. It's not the rarest, but they're all wintering at one spot in China, and should that be impacted, we could lose most of them. They're called the Siberian crane. They breed way up in Russia, but they apply makeup before they do their dance in the morning. They wake up in the morning, they'll find some mud, and they paint it on the base of their neck, and then they do their courtship dance, and then they mate. And if it rains, the mud washes off their feathers. So I say it's putting on their makeup. Other cranes have evolved that into a much more sophisticated pattern. This is right by my driveway in Wisconsin, my pair of sandhill cranes, and they're picking up mud and painting it all over their body. And the mud is filled with iron, and it oxidizes, forming rust that chemically links with the pigment of the feather, and it can't be washed out. And it camouflages them. They consider their nest, and it looks like a wet muskrat house. And see, the paint job is done. And they'll put their head down, and you're looking for the nest, and you just can't believe that you can't see it. Well, there it is, okay. And that's one of the reasons the sandhill crane is the most successful of cranes, because they've evolved this and a number of other things. Okay, thank you, Carrie. Believe it or not, I'm quite a quiet person, so that when I have to give a talk, the equipment isn't quite ready. And here they are at the nest. Well, one egg is laid, of course, about 2 days before the second egg, so they don't hatch synchronously. And the chicks engage in a little combat at the nest, and one becomes dominant over the other. And if there's a food scarcity, the dominant chick will get the food, and the other chick won't survive. And often, though, both chicks will survive if the habitat is in good shape. And both the male and the female lavish care on those little crane chicks, and they grow very quickly. Then the whole social behavior of the cranes change. After the chicks can fly, they start gathering in flocks, and flocks and flocks. And these are from Russia, and they are in Nebraska, and they're off to Russia. And the greatest crane show in the world is in Nebraska in March, when more than 1 million cranes gather over a 40-mile stretch of the Platte River. And I'm out there every March, and there's a sign-up sheet out there, and you put your name down and your address, and I'll let you know about when you could meet me out there. I just stay and I meet small groups of people through the month of March. It's a wonderful way to share the world's greatest crane show with future and present craniacs. Well, let's go to the Aborigines in Australia. A lot of the words are from the Aboriginal language, including brolga. Brolga was the first crane, and it was a beautiful woman famous for her dancing, and a wizard wanted to marry her, but she didn't like him, so he transformed himself into a whirlwind of dust, overcame Brolga as she was dancing, and when the dust settled, there was the first crane. In North America, in Wisconsin, the Ojibwe Native Americans, the Crane clan was the leader, and they presented this beautiful painting to the President of the United States, asking that the land around Lake Superior be set aside for the conservation of their culture and nature. At the wedding ceremonies in Japan and many other countries now, cranes are everywhere, symbol of fidelity, longevity, good luck, symbol of power and long life. At the Forbidden City in Beijing, the turtle and the crane. In Tibet, the crane is the sacred bird. There are a lot of other beautiful birds in Tibet, and one time I asked a Tibetan, why is the crane so special? There's lots of beautiful birds up here. He looked at me as if I was an idiot, and he said, the cranes are sacred because they're sacred. Oh, okay. That says it all. In Vietnam, they believe that the crane carries your soul to heaven. And the cranes today, all over the world, are symbols of peace. because a little girl in Hiroshima was folding origami cranes, and she felt if she folded 1,000, she would be healed from leukemia, but she didn't make it. And today, kids all over the world send garlands of 1,000 cranes to Hiroshima to express their interest in world peace. So that's about the life of cranes. And people often ask me, well, how did I get into this business? I was born with a great interest in birds. And my first memory in life is crawling on my hands and knees behind a duck with her brood. So everyone said I imprinted. And that's, that's likely true. But I had loving parents that knew that this little kid had to have chickens and ducks and whatever. And the MacArthur Foundation did a study of the MacArthur Fellows, and they found that the only common denominator pretty much across the board were parents that recognized the gift that their kid, the interest that their kid had, and cultivated that interest. And it's often people with handicap like colorblind, dyslexic, and so on. But these little kids excelled. And I followed my interest out to Alberta in the summer to work at a game farm where they had beautiful cranes, and I saw the wild sandhill cranes flying over, and I could hear them in the sky, and I couldn't see them. I get my binoculars, and I couldn't believe that a bird that high could make that much noise. And that's really where I got fascinated by cranes, but I'd always been fascinated by birds. And that led to Cornell University. I had to cut my hair, I guess, for that picture. Usually it was way out here. And I worked on the language of cranes and figured out the evolutionary tree of cranes based on their vocalizations. And that was so much fun. And I loved academics, and I found that everybody was so involved in their own little piece of research that that was like dominating their life, which was interesting, but very limiting. At the same time, I took courses in international conservation. I did a big essay in my course on Japan, and I realized that the whooping crane had been reduced to just 15 birds in 1941, and I wrote letters to people in all of these different countries. The Cornell University laboratory there, they had everybody's address, and I sent out hundreds of letters, and I get them back, oh, cranes used to be here, but they're not here anymore, and we don't know much about them, and they were all shot in such and such year. And then I discovered this quote by William Beebe, who was the head of the New York Zoological Society, right? When the last individual of a race of living things breathes no more, another heaven and earth must pass before another one can be again. That quote really, really had an impact on me. And a lot of the very rare cranes were from China and Russia. And to Americans, Russia was locked behind the Iron Curtain, and China was going through the Cultural Revolution then. They were closed, and all these rare cranes were over there. And I'm getting these letters from colleagues that the cranes are in such trouble. So I had this overwhelming feeling that I had to do something for conservation. And the biggest impact on me from a literary point of view was a book called The Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. And he was from Wisconsin. He was a professor at the University of Wisconsin. And the weekends he'd come out to this old chicken house in an abandoned farm by the river and plant prairies and pine trees. And he wrote the most beautiful essay about cranes, and he just saw one pair about 15 miles north of the shack, flying out of the marsh in a foggy morning. And he was so touched by this pair of sandhill cranes, which was very rare at that time. And he wrote a beautiful thing called the Marshland Elegy. That's the Leopold bench that he designed. And out beside he has this quote, "It is here that we seek and find, still find, our meat from God, Aldo Leopold." And my parents were Christians. I was brought up in a Christian home. I've always had a very strong Christian faith. And I was so happy to see that quote. And here is a few quotes from his Marshland Elegy. He, the crane, is the symbol of our untamable past, of that incredible sweep of millennia which underlies and conditions the daily affairs of birds and of men. When we hear his call, we hear no mere bird. He's the trumpet in the orchestra of evolution. The sadness discernible in some marshes arises from perhaps in their once having harbored cranes. Now they stand humbled adrift in history. Oh, all these things, all this information. Am I going to become a professor and study something more about minutia? Well, that's the quote again. I guess we screwed up. And here's the whooping crane. I'm concerned about them. And here's Bill Conway. And Natalie told the story, true story. I'm not going to tell it again. But he had the biggest impact on me more than all of my professors and colleagues at Cornell. And he would look at me straight in the eye and he says, "George, if you go into academics, you're going to waste your life." You guys can hear him say that, right? And I think he wanted me to work with the New York Zoological Society. He gave me a grant to work in Japan my first year, see how it goes and all that. But just as I was about to leave Cornell, and I'm so busy, I'm getting ready to go to Japan, I overhear a conversation in the corridor. I'm Ron Sauey from Baraboo, Wisconsin. And I've never met someone from Wisconsin, and I know all about Aldo Leopold in Wisconsin. He wrote about Wisconsin. So I introduced myself, and that Ron Sauey became the co-founder of the International Crane Foundation. So I always say that Aldo Leopold introduced us. And I told Bill Conway, and Bill Conway said, "Oh, this is the best news." He was so supportive. "How can I help you get more cranes and money and so on?" So that's Ron. And in February or March of 1973, we incorporated on the Sauey farm. It used to be for horses. But they moved their horses to Ocala, and we retrofitted the farm for cranes, and the rent was right, $1 a year. But we had to raise money to support our efforts. A former stall is now the education headquarters. And, you know, for the first 5 years, people weren't paid. We had volunteers. We had an old farmhouse. I had a line of credit at the grocery store, and sometimes it'd be over $1,000, and I'd get somebody to donate, and either I bought crane food or paid the grocery store. And somehow, with all our volunteers and our enthusiasm, we made it. And now I want to credit artists. Artists are such an important part of conservation. They're communicating what we feel in our soul, both in writing, like Leopold, and in art. And Wisconsin's foremost artist of wildlife was Owen J. Grummey on the left. He wrote and illustrated the books, The Birds of Wisconsin. And he lived not far from Baraboo, became my friend, and said, "I want to make the biggest painting in my life of whooping cranes, but I've never seen one." So I was able to give him photographs of birds, of whooping cranes, and the habitat, and he created this beautiful painting. We call it Salute to the Dawn. And we had 450 prints made, and he numbered and signed every one. Then he would bring someone who wanted a commission, who wanted an original painting. He said, I'll do an original painting, but first you got to come with me over to the Crane Foundation. Then I'd give the tour, and we'd show them the prints, and Owen Grommy says, okay, now you've passed the first requirement. The second one is you've got to buy a print. And it's only $1,000. And that's how we got to know people that could help us out. And this went on for years. So I'll be forever grateful to Owen and Ann Grommy, and to Mr. and Miss, these are Ron's parents, who leased us the property for so many years. But boy, did we do some historic things. We were the first to ever breed 2 species of cranes, the hoodeds and the Siberians. They'd never bred before in captivity. We were able to work with the US and Russian governments to get Siberian crane eggs 10,000 miles from Russia to Wisconsin, and this one hatched over Cleveland. Ron and I look a bit harassed. And we had a stack of permits that thick. You wouldn't believe the number of permits and meetings between the bureaucrats on both sides. And in both Russia and the United States, there were so many permits. When we came in with the egg box, I said, oh, just go, please. So that was pretty funny. We still have all those papers. And the eggs hatched, and Dr. Flint came over from Moscow to see the first chicks. And soon we were breeding Siberian cranes. What people never did before was put lights over them to simulate the land of the midnight sun, and they nest way up in the Arctic. And we had the only Siberian crane in captivity in the US. Her name was Phyllis from Philadelphia, Philadelphia Zoo. And then we got a male from Germany. He'd been through 2 world wars and survived in Switzerland in a zoo. He was ancient. We did artificial insemination, and under the lights with Wolf next door to Phyllis, she laid 12 eggs. You know, usually they only lay 2. So we started breeding these cranes. And our whole goal was, if we lose all the cranes in Russia and China, we'll have this species bank of birds in captivity. And we worked with many zoos, not only the Bronx Zoo, the Houston Zoo, many zoos in our work with cranes. And we continue that work today. And our population increased, and we had to increase our board of directors and bring in more money. And soon we had to move. We outgrew our place. But I had a spiritual experience. I was a volunteer, I was a Christian, but I never really put all the problems that these are facing seriously into the hands of a higher power. And that happened on the Korean demilitarized zone when I was facing a great crisis in 1979. So I credit the help from above for the creation of this beautiful new crane foundation on 250 acres of land, 6 miles north from the Sauey property. In the middle of it, we've restored 114 acres of prairie, which is knockout gorgeous. And down at the bottom, you can meet all the cranes of the world. This is Crane City with 61 crane dominiums, where we have whooping cranes, and from the birds we produce there, we are reintroducing them into the wild, a new flock in Wisconsin that migrates to Florida, and a new non-migratory flock in Louisiana. So, welcome to the Crane Foundation. We're open from the 1st of May to the end of October. And that's our little visitor center where you see a video, then you go out and you meet all the different types of cranes. This is our most popular exhibit with the whooping cranes. And we have the prairie, that's virgin prairie in the background in May with the lupines. breeding and wattled cranes at their pond in front. We have thousands of school kids come in the spring, and it really makes me feel young when retired people come up and say, I was here in 3rd grade. And my favorite thing at the Crane Foundation is walking out on the trails. We have 4 miles of trails. And to see every 2 weeks, it's a different cast of flowers blooming. And we're coming up to our peak now with the butterfly milkweed, the yellow coneflower, the bergamot, and the trout lily, or the Michigan lily, blooming on our prairie. So I can't tell you the stories about what we've done to help all the cranes in the wild, but from the very start, we have been concerned about, Ron did his PhD on the Siberian cranes wintering in India, and I worked in Korea and Japan and the Middle East a lot in the 1970s. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the whooping crane at the top and the Siberian crane, both of which are circled there. So a lot of people say, how did this bird ever survive if they were reduced to just 15? All I can say is they must have had good genes. They nested on the prairies, and Europeans came in and just ate everything. They killed all the bison, they killed all the cranes. And at the turn of the century in Wisconsin, there were no white-tailed deer, if you can imagine. There were no Canada geese, or very few Canada geese. There were no wild turkeys. The cranes, the hoopers were all killed off. A few sandhills were there. And the whole conservation movement started in Louisiana when the millinery trade, put beautiful heron feathers in your hat, was attacked to stop it with the Tabasco sauce people, the McElhenney family, which led into the formation of the National Audubon Society, and then there was John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt, the conservation people, and then along, Aldo Leopold and so on. So we'd have this, our national wildlife programs and parks and so on. That all happened in the 20th century. Before that, it was carnage. And we're dealing with countries now that are where we were back in the 1850s. You have to put these things into perspective. This is where the whooping cranes breed. They migrate 2,700 miles to get to Texas, and they migrate in small groups. In the winter, they defend territories, wetland territories along the coast. Each pair requires about 500 acres of salt marsh because they feed on blue crabs and need a lot of land to produce the crabs. This is the border of their territory. And their numbers have slowly increased. And it's a 10-year cycle that corresponds to the rabbit cycle in Wood Buffalo National Park. So when the rabbits crash, the wolves and the wolverines and the lynx and so on will take whooping cranes. That's what we think causes this 10-year cycle. And now we're up to 550 whooping cranes in the wild. Captive breeding started in 1966 in Maryland at the Patuxent Wildlife Research Center, not far from Washington. They brought eggs from Canada and raised whooping cranes. The population was divided. There were about 60 birds at Patuxent, and they sent half of them to the Crane Foundation in 1989. And 5 years ago, the Patuxent was closed, and now we have 8 different centers around the country working with whooping cranes. We developed these techniques for raising cranes so they're not imprinted on humans. We taught them to fly behind ultralight aircraft to learn the migration route between Wisconsin and Florida. We're very grateful to a group in Canada called Operation Migration that would come down every year and work with our cranes. These are in Louisiana, where we had a non-migratory flock. The last bird was seen in the wild in 1951. And now we have about 80 birds. We start them out in a pen like this until they acclimate. Then we take the netting off it and they can fly in and out. And eventually they go wild. and they discovered crayfish ponds. Much more food there and easier to get, and we've done a lot of work with the farmers. They really like the whooping cranes. The whooping cranes are territorial, so they'll drive away all other whooping cranes, and they'll help themselves to the crayfish. But former areas that used to be beautiful wetlands are now crayfish ponds, and the whooping cranes, to our delight, have co-adapted. And here is a whooping crane at her nest in Louisiana, and the chicks have just hatched. We have about 80 whooping cranes now in the flock in Louisiana. Okay, now we're going to shift gears and go to Russia. This is the bird, the Siberian crane. We brought the eggs from Russia to Baraboo. And these are the wetlands in northern Russia, vast expanses, no people up there to speak of, and unlimited habitat right across northern Russia. They have a very different kind of call, very musical call. And see their base of their neck is all painted up, and there's a little chick. And they migrate all the way to India to a beautiful reserve near the Taj Mahal. And in India, we're known as the lily of birds. The problem was they had to cross all those stands, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and many areas they were hunted. And every year there were fewer and fewer cranes coming to India, and the last bird was seen in 2003. Indira Gandhi was a bird watcher, and she would go down to see the Siberian cranes when they arrived there in November. The big problem was beautiful Afghanistan. Ron Sauey went there after he saw the birds migrate north in the spring, and he went to a lake and he found all of the cranes that he'd been studying during the winter. He could recognize the juveniles by their plumage. They molt from brown to white at a different rate. So we started working in this beautiful country in the 1970s, and the government of Afghanistan was taking steps to protect the cranes and these wetlands that they used. Beautiful, beautiful areas. And then the Russians invaded Afghanistan in 1979. And our crane population just went down, 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 because there's fighting everywhere, there's guns everywhere in Pakistan and in Afghanistan, and that history has continued to this very day. This is a picture that Ron took of his cranes at Lake Abiastada. And we were so encouraged that we are going to be able to turn things around and to protect the Siberian cranes. And this is the last bird seen in India during the winter of 2002 to 2003. Now, isn't it sad? Those birds have been going there for thousands of years. What's with our species? Where are we at? Are we insane? Virtually, yeah. And look at the poor Indians. In your next incarnation, you might be an endangered species. So our work is cut out for us. So, general statement, and I don't have to go through the history. The cranes are still being slaughtered in Afghanistan. There are two other species of cranes that migrate through there, the demoiselle and the Eurasian crane. So, after the US invasion of Afghanistan, I went there for 5 years, off and on, and worked with my colleague, the gentleman without hair. One of them is me. The other one is the grandson of the former king of Afghanistan, who was heading up the environment ministry. And we built a beautiful exhibit for cranes at the zoo, and we're very encouraged that things would go well. And these are my guys. I call them my Bee Gees, bodyguards. We traveled all over the place, and the one I want you to take special note of is the guy on the right. His name is Wally Matacek. Wally. And he was with the Ministry of Environment, and a brilliant guy. He spoke 5 languages. He represented Afghanistan at some 60 different international meetings, 2 of which were in the US, and so on. So there's Wally, and we're talking to some tribal people up by the Amu Darya River on the border with Turkmenistan, talking about Siberian cranes. And this is his father and his brothers at their home and one of his little girls. And this was in 2005. And then things went south. It was too dangerous for Wally to go outside of Kabul very far for fear of being killed by the Taliban. This underground stuff was going on long before August of 2021. And for foreigners, the danger of being kidnapped and brought back. So when the government fell in 2021, Wally and I talked, and he said, I'm so concerned about my 6 daughters and 2 sons because the Taliban can just take girls and pair them off to some elderly man. And of course, they're not going to have any education. Why did he have 6 daughters? Because you have to have a son to look after you. There's no social net in these countries. You depend on your families, and you depend on your sons, because the girls are going to be married off with another family. So they had 6 girls before they had Mohammed, and then they had another little boy. And so we were able to, my wife Kyoko and I decided we don't have any kids of our own. We're going to help this family survive. We were able to send the money through the Western Union, and in March of 2022, they found a way to escape. They told a lie. They said, we have to attend the wedding of our relatives in Tehran. And the government said, okay, but you got to come back. But there was a price on his head. They wanted him dead. He had to go into hiding all the time and getting passports for his wife and everything. And of course, the Taliban were sort of disorganized. And Wally knew his way around. So they get to the airport, and the whole family goes through, and he thinks, maybe I'll be caught when they look at my passport. And there are these 2 Taliban guys there checking everything. And he could tell from their accent that they were from another part of Afghanistan. And he says, oh, are you from so-and-so and so-and-so? Do you know so-and-so? Oh, yes. Okay. They never even looked at his passport. He had a little chat with them, and they became friends. And they got to Iran, and then on to Istanbul, and on to Mexico City, where they had to live. This is in Mexico City, for 13 months before they had permission to come into the United States. And this is the day they arrived in San Diego. And Sarah, the eldest girl, had been married for 3 months before they came, and she had a little baby that's hidden somewhere in there. And that baby was born in Mexico City, named Brian. And they moved into my home in Wisconsin. Unfortunately, my wife had passed away from leukemia, and the big house, old farmhouse, was empty, except for me. And so they moved in, and eventually we were able to get a house for them in Baraboo. And now the 3 older girls are at the University of Wisconsin getting straight A's. The other kids are all in school. They're all fluent in English and playing basketball and having a great time. The people of Baraboo have been absolutely fantastic. And Wally works full-time at the International Crane Foundation, heading up our Central Asia Program Coordinator, and he has 27 countries involved in his new group, which is going to hopefully turn around everything, stop the carnage of cranes, and reintroduce the Siberian cranes. That's our goal. And I've got great news. That's the migration route of the Siberian cranes that we lost. So we have this group, this Central Asian group now working. These are the migration routes of the demoiselle cranes and the Eurasian cranes. And look at all the countries that Wally's going to have to work with. It's complicated, let me tell you. So those are the countries that are under Wally's bailiwick. And this is our logo of our Central Asia group. And I just want to point out, this is the smallest of all of the cranes, the demoiselle crane, and they're so beautiful. They have all these fancy feathers to do all kinds of fancy things. And they have two major wintering areas, India and Africa, and different migration routes, and they're grassland birds. They breed across the steppes of Asia. They used to breed all the way to northwest Africa, but they're pretty much gone from the western areas. This is typical breeding habitat in Mongolia. And people live out there with the birds, and the Mongolians protect everything, all the birds. And one of my great pleasures these years is going to Mongolia. We're helping to set up a big nature reserve there. They nest in dry areas. Here's a bird turning its eggs, and they're out there in the grasslands with their chicks. Then they gather in huge flocks. I think this is a video. No. And they migrate from Mongolia across the Himalayas to India, but in the spring they don't go back that way. They go up through Afghanistan and Pakistan and then over. Because if they were to fly north into the Himalayas in spring, they'd be flying into winter. Now, our wonderful film, thanks to my friend David Attenborough. Are we ready for, isn't that wonderful? And my Nepali colleague, Rajendra Suwal, knew just where to get that footage, and he took the BBC crew up there, and they were able to get that. And the eagle dropped about, he reckons about 3,000 feet before the first eagle released the crane, and the second eagle grabbed it. And as soon as it grabbed it, they put their wings out, and the thermals brought them up the mountain again that was lifting up. And I actually took a group there 2 years ago in October to observe that, and I want to do it again. I do little trips with people. And so please sign up, and you'll keep in touch with us. There's a big sign-up sheet out there. We'll give you a free membership in the Crane Foundation if you join tonight, or if you sign up. And I have a little book out there full of crane stories, most of them true. And it was published in 1970 on my 70th birthday, and I'm writing a new book for my 80th, which comes up next year. So hope we can keep in touch. And I'm hope to be in Nebraska the full month of March and can meet you out there. So put Nebraska too if you're interested, and we'll send the mailing to you. So that's India. Here come the demoiselle cranes. The Indians love the cranes. They feed them over in Gujarat, and they're being slaughtered in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And also in Saudi Arabia and in Lebanon. And this is just an example when society goes without control. They have laws in these countries you're not supposed to, but nobody's enforcing the law, and guns are everywhere. So this is what we're dealing with. This is a sad situation. It's sort of like where America was at the into the 19th century. So that's Mahindra on the far left, meeting with the leaders of wildlife conservation in Pakistan. And over here, Wally is, where's Wally? He's somewhere. There he is, right here. And we have Zoom meetings now with these people and bringing our program forward. But these are the leaders of the different provinces of Pakistan that are responsible for the enforcement of the law to protect the wildlife. So we're beginning. And the slogan at the Crane Foundation is Cranes Unite Us, because a lot of people, no matter where they live in the world, realize that cranes are pretty wonderful. And I wanted to end with some really good news. We lost the cranes that go to Iran. The last bird was seen 2 years ago. We lost the birds that went to India during the span of the Crane Foundation. But Ron Sauey took great photographs of the birds in India, and I took those photographs to China in the late 1970s. And the Chinese took hundreds of prints of these pictures and sent them out all over the place, and they found where the Siberian cranes are wintering at this lake in southern China. And they've protected it and protected them throughout the migration route, and now we have 7,000 Siberian cranes in the eastern flock. So, there are more than one ways to skin a cat. So that's the end of my talk today. I hope I haven't gone on too long. And I'd be happy to sign a book. We're not allowed to sell them, but if you want to send a donation to the Crane Foundation, we welcome. Thank you very much.
Let's hear it one more time for Dr. George Archibald. We'll let you hydrate on this warm day, and then we'll take a few questions from the audience. Come on over. Let me grab this.
Sure.
I'm going to go straight to the front row. We've got two here. I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Hi. You mentioned in the beginning of your
Maybe we
talk.
can turn the lights up.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the beginning of your talk that North America houses both the most, one species that has the most and one species that has the least. I was curious if there's any correlation or any reason found for this.
The sandhill crane is a generalist. They'll nest in small wetlands and a variety of wetland types. And they never become flightless. They molt one flight feather or two or three at a time, so they always can fly. The whooping crane demands huge marshes, and they're white because they can be seen by other whooping cranes over great distances. So if there's a huge wetland complex and you're a whooping crane flying and you see two white dots, that means don't land there. That's somebody's home. And those huge wetlands were just devastated when Europeans came into the tall grass prairie. The whooping cranes didn't have a very large distribution from Indiana up to Alberta and into the north. So they were a bird of the prairies, really. And when the prairies went, the whooping cranes went, and the buffalo went, and so on. Yeah.
So no real correlation, just kind of happens that that's the way it.
Well, the whooping crane's habitat was destroyed. The birds were easily shot because they're bigger. The sandhill cranes also decreased greatly. But recent, the last 50 years, the sandhill cranes have moved west. They're now breeding all the way through to Nova Scotia. Not in huge numbers, but they're here. Yeah. One here?
Hello, thank you for your talk. Leopold from Germany here.
Oh, yeah.
And I have a question about the issue of hunting. So you've kind of shown that in a lot of Central Asian countries, hunting decreases the population.
Mm-hmm.
But in my understanding, and might be wrong, there's hunting ongoing in America of cranes. And is that, how does that impact the populations here? Is that entirely negative, or would you say there's also some benefit to the process?
There are 6 different populations of sandhill cranes. 3 of them are non-migratory: the Cuban, the Florida, and the Mississippi, and they're not hunted. The other 3 subspecies are the greater, the Canadian, and the lesser, and they are hunted in some states and provinces because their numbers have increased greatly in the past years. Now, not all states, and not in the East where they're still rare. Of course, the Crane Foundation does not endorse crane hunting, but we have no control over it other than in the state of Colorado, where one of our directors organized a whole organization to fight crane hunting and won. And in Wisconsin, where we take a stand against crane hunting. And in Nebraska, because that's where the millions of cranes stop and rest, they don't hunt them. The cranes are a very important bird in Nebraska. Actually, I'm against hunting of cranes for the obvious reason, but I'm not against hunting of some other species. And hunters have done so much for the conservation of wildlife. Ducks Unlimited, for example, they've done so much more than bird watchers have done for the conservation of habitats. It's complicated, yeah. But there's a very active crane group in Germany. Did you know about that?
No, I know cranes in Germany. I don't know the group.
Yeah. They have an opening of their new center on September 2nd. Yeah.
Excuse me, I live in Wyoming, and they hunt cranes and sandhill cranes in Wyoming. I was shocked.
Yeah.
I visited a friend, and he was so proud of having shot a sandhill crane. I think they have tags for them, and I guess there are plenty of them because Wyoming is pretty active conservationally, so I assume it's got a very healthy sandhill crane population.
Yeah, yeah. Those are greater sandhill cranes, and they're not real abundant compared to the other subspecies. And the whooping cranes migrate down the same flyway of the sandhills, and when the whooping cranes show up, they shut all the hunting. So they want to get the hunting over before the whooping cranes start migrating. And unfortunately, the birds they're shooting are mostly the greater sandhill cranes and not the cranes from further north that are coming along with the whooping cranes. So it's rather complicated. Yeah, thank you.
I see them all the time.
Yeah,
I was shocked.
yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
are there any biogeographers who have a theory as to why there are no cranes in South America? It seems strange that the continent with like the highest diversity of avifauna in the world wouldn't have a crane.
Yeah, we don't have any explanation for that, but we know that there are no skeletal indication that cranes have ever been there. And the closest relative to, or one of the closest relative to the crane is the limpkin. They're found in Florida, and they're found in many countries in South America. So another bird that's very close to crane is called a trumpeter, and they're only found in South America. But in South America, a lot of birds that nest in trees up in the northern continents nest on the ground like cranes in South America. For example, storks will nest on the ground in South America. If we were to introduce cranes to South America, they would eat the eggs of those other ground nesting birds. So there's no evolutionary indication that cranes were ever there, because cranes are big predators. They'll eat the chicks and eggs of red-winged blackbirds. Red-winged blackbirds do not like cranes, and so on.
Hi, I was wondering, do the captive raised cranes instinctively know the dances that the species does, since they're so complicated?
Yeah, the dance seems to be instinctively provided, but who you dance with is learned. And if you raise cranes in captivity and they don't see other cranes, they'll want to dance with you.
I'm involved with some groups that deal with small mammal populations like cheetah, and we always worried about inbreeding. When you have a population of 15, do you have the same concerns with laying eggs that they're somehow going to be genetic inbreeding?
We have no control over who pairs with whom in the wild, but we do in captivity. And we have a stud book, and we get the genetic information, the genetic diversity of each individual crane, and we try to outbreed as much as we can to get added diversity to the flock. But I think you can liken it to athletes. If you were to pick 15 athletes to start a new population of humans on an island versus picking 15 random people from the street, you might have great success with the athletes, but you might not have success with people that aren't so robust. So I think that the cranes, those survivors, were really very, very genetically healthy. That's the only explanation I can make. And God bless them, because they're continuing to increase. Yeah. Yes, over here. Yeah.
I've been reading, thanks very much for the talk. Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
I've been reading that in Britain, they've realized that natural coastland wetlands have been an excellent sea defense for millennia. And then when they turned them into farmland, the erosion really kicked off. So they're going in the opposite direction now, and governments are trying to increase wetlands. And I just wondered if you're seeing that anywhere else, and do you see government support for that kind of initiative?
Well, it's a real big problem now with sea level rise in Texas, because the coastal wetlands that the whooping cranes defend and spend the winter on are being inundated by more and more deep water. And the wetlands are going to have to move inland, but the way the environment is out there, they're moving into woody vegetation, forests and mangrove swamps and so on. Or developments. There's so much development. So that interaction for conservation in coastal areas is critical. I never realized that farmland was causing greater erosion in natural communities, and I'm sure a lot of dikes have saved more uplands, and now in the Netherlands they're turning a lot of former farmland back into wetlands and so on. So that's a dynamic that I don't really know a lot about. But we're very concerned about the whooping cranes. So we have an office in Texas, and we're working with landowners to get conservation easements so their land will not be turned into development, so that those wetlands can gracefully move inland.
Got about time for one or two more questions. Aside from, can you join George on the sandhill crane migration in Nebraska?
George, thank you for the talk. Your passion and love for this topic is quite inspirational, so appreciate you spending time with us tonight. I had a question about you mentioned multiple times at the beginning about the sandhill crane coming to New York, to our home state here, and so it sounds like that's unusual or something new. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, when I was a student at Cornell, 1968 through 1971, they started breeding in Montezuma. Is that a state wildlife area at the north end of Lake Cayuga? And now they're breeding at a number of locations. They're breeding in the Berkshires, in Massachusetts, and in northern parts of Connecticut. I don't know the exact locations, but you can go on eBird, and everything's reported on eBird. You can find out exactly where the sandhill cranes are in your state.
Well, I think sandhill cranes in New York is a great way to end this evening. Can we get another round of applause for George? You've been a great audience. Thanks for joining us.